This is the story of the great family. To tell the story, we need a little piece of the desert because so many important things in the story happen in the desert. The desert can be a dangerous place. The sun is so hot that as it comes down, it burns your skin. But at night when the sun is gone, it's so cold. When the wind blows in the desert, the sand stings your skin. And there's very little water. That means there's very little life and very little food. After the great flood, the animals gone out into the four corners to fill the earth with life. And so now we had rivers and people gathering along the rivers in cities. This is the city of Ur. And in this city, the people believed in many gods. They believed in a god of the river or a god of the desert, a god of the sun, of the stars. But there was one family, the family of Abram and Sarai, who believed in the one true God. And God told Abram and Sarai that it was time to leave the city of Ur and to travel out to a new city called Haran. And so they left Ur with all of their helpers, their donkeys and sheep. They slept in tents at night, and then they traveled again by day, using the water to help feed them. When they got to the city of Haran, Abraham would go out to the edge of the desert. God would come close to Abram, and Abram would come close to God. And it was here that Abram heard God tell him that he would be the father of a great family. He was old and didn't quite understand what that would mean. But he did understand that God meant for he and his wife Sarai to continue to travel out of the city, to travel out into the desert. And they stopped to pray because God was there. And they built an altar to mark the place, and they called it Shechem. They continued on their journey because they weren't at their new home yet. And again, God was there, and they built an altar. They called the place Bethel, and they prayed. They continued on their journey until they finally arrived at what would be their home. Abram went out again into the desert. He saw the night sky full of stars. God came close to Abram, and Abram was very close to God. And Abram heard God give him a promise. The promise was that Abram would become the father of a great family, and his wife Sarai would be the mother. God told Abram that the members of the great family would be as many as the grains of sand in the desert, as many as the stars in the night sky. Abram thought this was kind of funny because he and his wife Sarai were very old. But God changed their names to Abraham and to Sarah, and he fulfilled his promise. And they had a son, and they named him Laughter. The word for laughter in their language is Isaac. Isaac grew up into a man, and Sarah had become very old, and she passed away and was buried in the caves nearby. Abraham missed Sarah very much, but he knew he had another job to do from God before it would be time to join Sarah. And so Abraham sent a helper out past Bethel, past Shechem, and all the way back to the city of Haran. And there, Abraham's helper met a woman named Rebekah. Rebekah was full of kindness. she gave Abraham's helper, who was a stranger, water, enough for all of his animals, brought him home to give him a meal. And while he was there, the helper told Rebekah about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and how they would be the great family. And Rebekah knew that she was to join the great family. And she courageously left her home and traveled out with the helper all through the desert, past Shechem and past Bethel, until she saw her new home. Isaac ran to greet her, and they were married. Abraham was very old, and it was time for him to pass away, and he was again laid to rest with Sarah in the caves nearby. The great family continued to grow. Isaac and Rebekah had children, and their children had children, and their children had children, and that continued to happen until your grandparents had your parents, and your parents had you. And now we are all part of the great family.